Chapter 21. Rusted off-white farms, evidence that upstate New York is really part of the Midwest, lined either side of Route 32 south going toward Wallkill. Stone-pocked mailboxes were designed for Browns, Grays, Halls, and the Kingston Freemen. An ocean of tea green and silver leaves filtered the low late May sky. Hay fever grew high along the roadside. Spring sang, "Come build a maypole under my apple tree." An agent named Hallahan suggested to David that traveling under armed bodyguard was like being a little bait fish, with some other bait fish trying to protect you from mako sharks. That must be comforting as hell for David to hear now, Harry Callahan said. Not inaccurate, though, he added, puffing on his pipe. It doesn't have an eerie quality to it, David offered from the back seat of the government Lincoln. It feels like, oh, when you leave a movie matinee and walk out into bright sunshine, or like the first time you go outside after a shitty flu. David was extremely aware of the smallest details on trip. The different bird sounds along Route 32, some melodic, others shrill and electric, the muted colors of the landscape, shadow shapes, fresh earth smells coming in his open window. It was ridiculous, he was sure, but his heartbeat was a steady thump-thump for the entire 40-minute trip to meet the Nazi hunter Rabinowitz. Small apple farms shot by on either side of the road, then the Wallkill Correctional Facility, a slate-gray building in the center of a raving yellow cornfield. Then came the unincorporated village of Wallkill, New York. Pimply teenage boys and girls stood around Main Street in Wallkill Central jackets and engineering boots. The Lincoln cruised past Fesco's Feed and Grain, Frank's Beauty Salon for Women, Western Auto, State Farm. Nazi hunters, David thought in a daydream. The child, too. Total insanity. Halfway down the main drag, the Lincoln slipped into a diagonal space in front of Robbed Hatfield's Wallkill Inn. Good food and grog, the wooden sign read. My beer is raking gold. A strange thought occurred to David. At least something hit him the wrong way as he got out of the car in the haggard, peculiar farm town. Inside this little bar was America's. This much was documented everywhere. Through the late 1960s and 70s, the man who most responsible for bringing Nazi war criminals living in America to justice wasn't a sharp U.S. federal attorney or FBI department head. The man was a shy, skinny U.S. postal worker named Benjamin Paul Rabinowitz, a survivor of Auschwitz concentration lager, working nights and weekends out of his Secaucus, New Jersey, a studio apartment. It was Rabinowitz who had uncovered the fact that the U.S. Immigration and Naturalization Service had actually been protecting former Nazis for more than 25 years. The State Department had refused to turn Nazi mass murderers over to the Justice Department for prosecution. That high-ranking congressman, the CIA, and maybe even a U.S. president had used special influence to get important Nazi files transferred around the system so fast and so frequently that they never seemed to be in one place and thus were effectively closed to public scrutiny. Benjamin Paul Rabinowitz, postal worker, chasing the Nazis through rain, sleet, and snow. Inside the Wallkill Inn, David Rabinowitz and the government agents huddled around a splintery pine table. They drank Gold beer so cold it might as well have been carbonated water. Watching Rabinowitz, it was difficult for David to imagine much more than one of those pale, balding men who shuffle around the back rooms of every post office in America, quietly sorting the mail. The government pensioner was under 5 feet 5 inches, with mottled, mush-yellow teeth. His wrinkled cheeks and turkey neck were covered with dark gray stubble. He wore a stained gabardine suit bought in 1960 at the latest. Damn, that's a long time to wear one suit. Benjamin Rabinowitz also had a great drooping wen on the right side of his nose and the disconcerting habit of saying bullshit every fourth or fifth word out of a slightly collapsed, somewhat feminine-looking mouth. Rabinowitz knew his Nazis, though. At the time of the Wallkill meeting, he was hard at work on a manuscript that was already some 2,100 typewritten pages long, titled Leading American Nazis. It traced, among other things, 400 of the 750 companies set up by Martin Bormann to protect the Third Reich. The book tracked several of these companies right to the heart of corporations. A major oil company, one of the Six Sisters, a noted cereal maker, a corporation that owned one of the biggest television networks. If Rabinowitz was correct, David figured, business fortunes, major stocks, and impeccable reputations would tumble like dominoes come publication time for Leading American Nazis. Was that a clue to consider? David suddenly wondered. Could that possibly be connected with the storm troop, or was his imagination simply getting out of hand? Let me ask you a rather strange leading question, Dr. Strauss, the Nazi hunter rasped after all the general introductions were over. David Strauss shifted uneasily on the wooden bench. He had no idea what to expect from a man whose obsession, hobby, whatever, was Third and Fourth Reich Nazis. What do you know about the Jews and President Franklin Roosevelt? This is during World War II I'm talking about. What do you think? David was noticing that he kept adjusting his gold wedding band as he sat at the slightly surreal barroom table. He found it especially hard to look into Rabinowitz's rehummy, blood-flaked eyes. Not an awful lot, a little bit. David started to answer the strange man's question. Roosevelt, Cordell Hull, Harry Hopkins. They all must have known about the German and Austrian concentration camps, say, from 1939 on. They waited until 1943 to do something substantial or meaningful about the Holocaust. That's fairly well documented, I think. Arthur Morse wrote a popular book, right? Benjamin Rabinowitz nodded indifferently. He bit off half of a hard-boiled egg brought with the beers. Yolk crumbled down the front of his shirt. Now, why in God's name do you think President Roosevelt and Secretary of State Hull acted like that toward the Jews? Sort of a peculiar way to act, eh? I mean, you and I wouldn't have acted like that, waiting 4 years to do something about the ovens. David thought that he had no goddamn idea why President Franklin Roosevelt had done anything ever. Well, I would imagine Roosevelt was getting unbelievable pressure to stay out of the war in Europe. Isolationists, the 1940 election, and his promises to keep our boys home. I also believe that some large American companies were still supplying and secretly arming Germany at that time. And what? Dr. David Strauss suddenly felt as if he were taking orals in modern world history. The little mailman Menke was watching him like some sort of madman professor emeritus. I guess, well, shit. David finally had to laugh. If the American people had known about the Nazi death camps, they would have forced this country into World War II sooner. Let's hope so, anyway. The Nazi hunter folded his liver-spotted hands together, prayer style. No bullshit now, he said. All right, Dr. Strauss, David, if you believe that I'm a sane man, and I am, if you believe I am a relatively intelligent man to have tracked down all of these Nazi bastards, what do you make of this statement? Rabinowitz made a small dramatic pause. No bullshit now, David. This is important with respect to understanding the killings in your family. Tell me what you think of this idea. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt was a Nazi. The agent Hallahan spit out a mouthful of beer. David's mind whirled off into blank, empty space for a few seconds. Rabinowitz just stared at the young, dark-haired doctor. He was perfectly serious, David was certain. David realized that his face and neck had gone all red. He began to feel slightly paranoid, foolish. He answered with a statement that didn't make any sense to him. Well, I'd have to take it that you were using the word Nazi metaphorically, like Richard Nixon was a prick. Rabinowitz's face lit up with a wonderful Halloween pumpkin smile. Good, wonderful. He began to praise David like a proud yeshiva instructor. Mr. Callahan, are you still with us? Harry Callahan nodded his head slowly. Yeah, sure. Only in addition to being a prick, Nixon was a Nazi. This came so unexpectedly from the serious-faced agent that it made all of them laugh. Benjamin Rabinowitz especially laughed until tears were rolling down his mottled cheeks. Okay then, he finally said to David, his eyes now shiny and alive. Okay, let's make up a theory about the Strauss family. You see, it's stupid to try and think with 1, 2, 3, 4 logic, but we don't have all the 1, 2, 3, 4 facts yet. Let's just suppose that someone in your family, your grandmother, your brother, had seriously, perhaps inadvertently, threatened the Nazis. Yes, maybe, it's a Die Spine, Odessa. This is a very complicated matter, though. Many possibilities, given what's happened so far. We have to move one step at a time. David literally sat on the edge of his seat. He watched the Nazi hunter with quiet amazement. He was beginning to understand certain new things about being a survivor, what it meant to be a Strauss. David also had the feeling that Benjamin Rabinowitz was being cautious with him, bringing him along slowly. For the moment, I think two things. Rabinowitz clasped his hands once again. One, someone in the Strauss family has seriously frightened the Nazis. Somehow. I don't know exactly how yet. That part confuses me. Okay? Two, we mustn't limit our thinking to the old-time Nazis, David. Remember, Franklin Roosevelt. Nazis take many odd shapes and forms today, as many shapes as evil itself. I mean that very seriously. And Mr. Callahan, if I was to take a guess, I would say that what is involved here could bring a serious war to entire countries. Big doings. Bigger than anyone might think to guess right now. A very interesting combination of things at work here. Benjamin Rabinowitz suddenly thrust his skinny hand across the table. He shook David's hand with surprising strength. You're a nice man, David. I wanted to meet you. This is a good start. This is terrific. Maybe we're going to hunt Nazis, young man. Chapter 23. Benjamin Rabinowitz took a deep breath. Now I have to tell you a few things about your grandmother and myself. For the next hour, Rabinowitz patiently told David about the old days. Some good, some not so good. Rabinowitz even gave David the very vaguest details about a secret Jewish group that had been formed to ensure against another Holocaust. He told David about a meeting in Jerusalem where David's grandmother had underestimated the Fourth Reich. At the same time, Benjamin Rabinowitz began to get the feeling that David knew almost nothing about the Jewish Defense Group. Elena Strauss had kept this grandson out of it. She had shielded the doctor from any involvement whatsoever. In Jerusalem, we had wanted to try and stop the Reich once and for all, David. One final time, and then it would all be over. We wanted one last confrontation with the swine, Rabinowitz rasped. David Strauss couldn't have agreed more. Just one final battle with the Nazis would be perfect. When they finally left the Wallkill Inn, it was minutes after 9 on the beer sign glowing in front of the window. A bright green stoplight at the four corners shivered on a steel necklace hung across Main Street. Maybe it was his imagination, but David felt a chill crawling up his back. His mind was racing with all new possibilities. Extreme pressure was pushing in on his skull from all sides. Actually, though, he felt pretty good, David thought. Better, anyway. He was excited about working with Rabinowitz. The night was buzzing with possibilities and prospects. It will be interesting to see, he heard the Nazi hunter say in a dream voice. He felt the skinny hand on his arm. I wouldn't even discount Arabs. Black September. Even Arabs have to be a possibility at this point. Arabs Franklin Roosevelt, Nazi conspiracies high up in the United States government. The important Nazis would have to be truly frightened to come out in the open after all these years. The Reich moving once again. For whatever reasons, David was actually beginning to think a little like a Nazi hunter. It was a fait accompli then. He was going to become involved. Amazing as it all seemed right at that moment. You must be careful now, he heard Rabinowitz warn. The Strauss heir must be careful, David. I begin to wonder if I shouldn't respect your grandmother's wish to keep you out of all this. Rabinowitz's voice trailed off. As he got into the Lincoln, David noticed a tiny silver light flash across the darkness of Main Street. A cigarette lighter, he thought after his initial start. So this is how paranoia feels. So this is how it's going to be from now on, David realized with a shiver. Just then, David heard a distinct noise outside the open car door, a sickening, crunching noise. David's nervous system clicked on as if an unseen hand had thrown a full power switch. The next few seconds were impossible to comprehend. Benjamin Rabinowitz's hand flew up to clutch his forehead. The old man groaned loudly. He looked at David. Utter disbelief and shock stamped onto his face. They shot him, David screamed out. Oh my good God. A second bullet ripped through the car's side roof. David threw his arms up to protect his head. He went crashing down into the narrow space between the front and back seats. The Lincoln suddenly jolted and screeched away from the curb. David was still lying across the floor with the Lincoln's back door swinging wide open. David could feel the road bumps coming hard and fast against his cheekbone. The floor, the pile carpeting, was bouncing up and clubbing him repeatedly. It was all unreal, a terrible nightmare. It had to be. They killed Rabinowitz. David could hear himself yelling. They shot him. They killed him. As the Lincoln swerved and turned, David began to throw up. So this is how it's going to be from now on. Chapter 24. Stranger events transpired during the week of the funeral of Benjamin Rabinowitz. Much stranger events. It began on Fifth Avenue in New York. Fritzy Wyatt Earp, mustache drooping, six-gun banging off his meaty hip, a 25-year-old New York City patrolman, Michael Rosenberg, finally had to stop and sit and vomit. Rosenberg plopped down on the dusty curb at 5th Avenue and 48th Street, in front of a Pan Am ticket office, across from Scribner's bookstore. He took his visored cap off, hung his head between dark blue trouser legs, and out it came, a vicious orange-yellow river running down over the gutter litter. Rosenberg then unbuttoned his police tunic down to the third gold button. Perspiration was pouring down onto his V-neck t-shirt. It dripped from his thick mustache. The young New York policeman simply could not believe what he was witnessing on Fifth Avenue. The morning before, a gawky zombie in a Fleet messenger service hat and Let It Bleed t-shirt had arrived bright and early at 1330 Avenue of the Americas, the executive offices of ABC TV. He had hand-delivered a reel of film in a flat silver can. Taped to the can was a paid invoice and two-page cover letter addressed to the executive board of the TV network. Less than 15 minutes later, 4 New York City policemen descended on Fleet headquarters on the lower level of Grand Central Station. The letter and film delivered by one of their messengers contained the first substantial news from the storm troop since the Strauss family murders 33 days earlier in Westchester. Unless the accompanying educational film strip is shown on all network news programs tonight, the cover letter instructed, one of the Jewish families listed on page 2 will be extracted within 24 hours. There will be no deadline extensions, none. Listed first among the names on page 2 was an obvious choice, the powerful Jewish family that owned a controlling interest in ABC, Mr. and Mrs. Charles Samuelson, United Nations Plaza, children, Robert, Louise, Rachel, grandchildren, 13, listed number 2, 3, and 4 were the Jewish stars of ABC's top-rated TV shows. At 7 p.m. New York time, the anchorman for ABC Evening News came on the air looking particularly pale and tense. The newsman recited a short preface to the special film ABC News was about to present, citing the extraordinary circumstances behind the film's showing, apologizing for the film's content beforehand. The 11-minute clip was then shown without interruption. The first 5 minutes of the film consisted of old black and white news and Nazi propaganda footage. The 1940s style film presented the usual straight-arming, jack-booted marching scenes through Munich and Berlin. Then Hitler Youth and Little Duchess's Jungvolt in Frankfurt, sing-songing Sieg Heil, Sieg Heil, Sieg Heil. It panned across crowds of German people screaming approval like Stuka dive bombers. It flashed a sign on a Munich street lamp, Action Juden. Then the Fuhrer appeared, the famous manic stare making him look more like Charlie Chaplin than Adolf Hitler. The Fuhrer was shown driving a new black VW convertible through a crowd of 200,000 cheering Nazis. He was pictured after just having made monkeys of Delator and Chamberlain. Most chilling of all, a brand new original piece of marching music had been composed and scored for the film. After the black and white segment, a tall, blond man, a recognizable film actor named Owen Landers, appeared on screen. This portion of the film was in slickly shot 35mm color. No expense seemed to have been spared in its filming. The pleasant-looking actor wore a charcoal business suit, starchy white shirt, striped red necktie. He looked very much like the president of some large, very successful company. On his right arm, the actor wore a red and white Nazi brassard. Very calm and reasonable, with the intensity and polish of a regular news commentator, the actor explained how misguided Jews now living throughout America were a major cause of the country's social, economic, and especially moral problems. The Jews were America's pornographers, its slumlords, its dissidents. The Jews were the money hoarders on one hand, the money lenders on the other. The contentious Jews were the chief reason America had made enemies all over Europe and in the Middle East. Of course, because of their vast wealth, the Jews had unequal representation in Washington. The camera slowly crept in on the impressive-looking actor. This time has come for all of us to look closely at the Jewish element in America, to carefully consider some fundamental questions about our country. This does not mean any kind of violence directed against Jews. It simply means examination. Careful examination of the priorities of this country and the reasons behind our priorities. Those of you who agree, those of you who believe we should re-examine important issues at this time, I ask you to do one thing only. A simple, harmless gesture. The actor said, a gesture. Almost too small a gesture it seemed. Curious. Tomorrow at noon, simply honk your automobile horns. Tomorrow at exactly noon. All along Fifth Avenue, every other car, or third car, or fourth or fifth car was honking its horn. Cars down near 42nd Street and the library honked. Cars and trucks opposite Corvettes, Brentanos, right in the heart of America's most sophisticated city. They honked, right in the middle of the city with the largest Jewish population in the world. That's sad. Up near Saks and St. Patrick's Cathedral, cars honked, and a fist fight had begun in the street. Past Central Park and the plaza, on way up into Harlem, the shrill symphony of horns seemed even louder, more horrifying, and unbelievable. At about 3 minutes after 12 noon, the din began to lessen. A false silence came, then a few late beeps, angry personal statements. Then an eerie calm fell over New York, over Los Angeles, Chicago, Miami, over any little highway where there were cars and horns and Nazis. On Fifth Avenue, a pretty short-haired businesswoman wandered out of a soup shop called Le Portagerie. The dazed woman sat down on the curb next to New York patrolman Michael Rosenberg, a stranger, another Jew. The two young people held each other for a long, tender moment. They just held on and looked into the dark, passing automobiles. Chapter 25. Automobile horns. Bleeding against the thin skin of her eardrums, the hammer, anvil, stirrup, vibrating, making Alex Rothschild feel nauseated and afraid. That evening, the actress wandered south on Fifth Avenue from the Sherry Netherland, where she had her New York apartment, down toward a violet shroud of smog and night that lay over the area of Manhattan known as Gramercy Park. 11:15 p.m. Dark suits and long gowns were arriving home at the plaza from a chorus line and death trap, from expensive suppers at Sardi's, Caravel, Gallagher's. A few late-night lights blinked off in the GM building. Hispanic cleaning ladies, investment house and advertising agency workaholics. Double Days was just closing on the block between 56th and 57th. A shopping bag lady slept peacefully in the alcove of Elizabeth Arden. Automobile horns. Simply honk your horn, the Reich had commanded. The new Nazis, countless thousands of them in New York, in Southern California, in Maine, Arizona, Georgia, Florida, Texas. A cab honked in front of the St. Regis and Alex nearly flew out of her skin. God damn you, stupid. Her long legs felt tired and rubbery all of a sudden. Her mind was bogged in a swamp of the blackest, foulest images. Her stomach was twisted into a tight, impossibly hard knot. Alex heard distant New York police sirens. She could almost hear the Gestapo cars wailing through the streets of Berlin, Frankfurt, and Munich. The overhead street lamps might have been the searchlights on the dark towers surrounding Dachau Konzentrationslager. The Nazis were marching again. The Nazis had never actually stopped marching. Alex Rothschild was struck by a severe blood sugar rush on her walk down Fifth Avenue. A slight ringing in her ears grew into a shrill, head-splitting whistle. She gasped out loud for air, more oxygen. Finally, she had to stop walking altogether. The tall, slender, dark-haired woman leaned against the hood of a parked car. Her movements were like those of a drunk about to be sick. Out of the corner of her eye, Saks' front canopy sign appeared to be spinning across the avenue. A familiar series of pictures went flashing through her mind, out of control as they flew at her optic nerve. An old favorite Nightmare album. A blood-red dawn shone across acres and acres of gray, muddy fields. The rising sun seemed to sit like a squashed red egg on top of a line of ghostly ash trees. Dark wooden walls interceded, black-washed turrets, high barbed wire fences. A very early morning parade in a bleak, smoking prison yard. A young woman seen from the waist up, naked, emaciated, Nina Rothman, Alex's mother. A German soldier, an SS captain, telling 19-year-old Nina Rothman to kneel down on the muddy, smoking ground. A smell 100 times worse than the worst decaying smell of fish and unclean animals hung thick in the air. A heavy odor of human sweat, excrement, dysentery, spotted typhoid over everything. Nina seeming not to notice, thinking in her fear-crazed mind that this is such a waste, such an incredible, stupid, horrible twist of fate. The erect SS captain sauntering away from the young Jewish woman, down a long line of young women and teenage girls, the prettiest ones this morning, a few of the elite German Jews, the wealthy ones, 67 of them, most past guessing what the Nazis wanted this time. This SS captain turned out to be their friend, a Nazi of unusual compassion. Almost no taunting and cruel delays. His right arm flashed quickly behind the 67 backs. The squad of prison guards fired. The kneeling women toppled over into a 3-foot deep gully dug just in front of them. Young mothers and teenagers obliterated in seconds. That shouldn't be funny. Nearly buried as well. I have a fucked up mind. Some ragged camp children ran toward the long, gaping trench and peered into it. Alex Rothman saw the large, bloody hole in Nina Rothman's back. Why'd they shoot them in the back and not the head, though? Her mother's murder. Alex screamed out on Fifth Avenue. She couldn't remember her vision, just a feeling of terror. She screamed words she wouldn't remember a minute afterward. The horns, the death camp visions. A few late-night strollers stopped to look at her, but no one came to help. The New York City policemen finally came on the run. Two heavy Bronx or Brooklyn accented voices, gruff, very male and scary. What's going on here? What's the matter with you? Alex was suddenly alert and embarrassed. She was trembling uncontrollably. She understood what had happened, what was about to happen now. I'm all right now, she managed. Her mouth was incredibly parched, sticky dry. I'm all right, thank you. Then one of the policemen suddenly recognized who she was. Hey, he said to his partner, do you know who this is? His voice became high-pitched as he spoke to Alex. Are you all right, Miss Rothschild? Are you on any drugs, Miss Rothschild? Alex shook her head. She tried to stand away from the parked car. If they take me to Bellevue, she began to panic. Today was very bad. The horns. I'm sorry that I screamed out. I was just very afraid. She didn't know how much she was going to have to explain. Thank God they seemed to understand. The two policemen brought Alex back to 59th Street in their cruiser. They were gentle and they tried to be understanding. One of them was Kevin Stapleton, a St. John's graduate. The other was Howie Cohen, a young fallen-away Jew from Brooklyn. They had both seen Sarah, and they told Alex that she was a tremendous actress and artist. In the car with them, Alex slowly regained her self-control. She was thinking that she couldn't allow herself to get this out of control again. She promised herself she wouldn't let it happen ever again, no matter what. The officers accompanied Alex inside the gold and Italian marble lobby of the Sherry Netherland. They escorted her up to the lacquered birdcage elevator bank. Doorman, bellman, deskmen, wealthy European and Texan hotel guests stared curiously. Why Texan hotel guests? Impossible not to. Their strange images reflected off the nearby windows of Le Petit Cafe. Patrolman Cohen made her promise to see a doctor. Alex promised. Thank you, she whispered, and then went upstairs to the safety of her room. Part 3. Chapter 26. The new Rothschild look. Now you can have it too, proclaimed the front cover of Vogue. The Rothschild only her Monsieur knows, squealed a subhead on Cosmo. Rothschild and Redford bellowed a 100-foot-long movie poster over Broadway and 45th Street, just north of Times Square. That year, Alex Rothschild was the living legend in America. At least Alex was as close as she wanted to being a legend. It had begun when she was 21 years old, 1964, with Alex quietly establishing herself as one of the world's more successful commercial models. In the next few years, Alex had done everything from the latest shampoo to Russian crown fur. Both men and women seemed to like her sensual face, her figure, the way she moved, especially her smile. Then Alex had segued into film acting, one of the more successful model to actress transitions, it turned out. Alex had been nominated for Critics' Circle Awards for her first two films. She had won an Oscar for her fifth film. Alex already had her own Bronze Star on Hollywood Boulevard. Film number 6 had been a hugely successful television movie tracing Jewish Arab roots in Palestine. Number 7 had grossed in excess of $90 million. So far, there had been no 8th film, just an endless stream of gossip broadcast from Chasen's and the Polo Lounge. Alex and David Strauss had three important connecting points in their past. First, Alex and David were either third or fourth cousins. Both of them always forgot which. From the time they were 6 or 7 years old, they had been thrown together at a variety of bar mitzvahs, weddings, and funerals. David, in fact, had been one of the first children Alex had been able to successfully relate to after she'd come to America. Second, Alex and David had been teenage lovers at Scarsdale High School. They're cousins! They'd suffered through the traditional ring and letter sweater transfers, the loss of virginity at 15 inside the Pound Ridge Reservation, the awful nicknames for each other, Franny and Zooey, from the J.D. Salinger novella. Third, they had been lovers in college. David at Princeton, Alex a 2-hour car ride away at Vassar. Then Alex had mysteriously left Vassar in the middle of her senior year. She'd gone to the Ford agency in New York, and then to Wilhelmina during the Model Wars, and finally to William Morris as she launched off into film. Alex admitted to interviewers again and again that she was neurotically driven, obsessively motivated to be one of the best actresses in the world. Most of all, Alex revealed in the interviews she had to feel that her life had purpose, otherwise she might as well have died with the others back in Germany. David, meanwhile, had decided that he wanted to be a doctor. He was also certain that he was over Alex Rothschild, or Alex Rothman, as he'd known her back in Westchester. Every so often, one of them sent off a letter or telegram to Franny, to Zooey, usually when one or the other of them was in trouble or when one needed a sympathetic shoulder, but that was the extent of it. The end, in movie terms. Chapter 27. David spotted Alex from high up on his 5th-floor sun porch at Cherrywoods. It was late on a sparkling, blue-skied Saturday, less than a week after the mysterious death of Benjamin Rabinowitz. Alex was walking in front of the Sunset Lounge. She had on a pink shirt, faded jeans, and sandals hanging from a beaded belt. Her black hair was longer than ever. Rothschild! Even from that distance, David could see why she'd had such success everywhere. Somehow Alex managed to fuse the hot Monday and the everyday one. I have no clue what that means. She could be beautiful or down to earth, sometimes with just a turn of her head. After watching her for a few minutes, David retreated off the creaky wooden porch. He walked back inside his bedroom. As he put on a shirt, he mentally reviewed the distant past in his mind. Then David stopped and sat down hard on the edge of his bed. He stared at the collection of Nazi books and papers. He gazed out the porch screen door. Very slowly, David wandered back out to the porch again. Alex was gone. David's eyes drifted along with the canoe down on Lake Arrow. He saw two boys in red rubber swim masks and matching nose plugs playing on the diving float. Across the lake, an FBI agent sat in a high-perched gazebo, casually watching east and west houses through binoculars. David raised an arm to the man. The agent seemed to wave back. "Cozy as hell," David muttered. Why the hell hadn't he just gone downstairs and said hello to Alex like a normal human being? Damn it. David stepped inside again and looked at the face in the mirror over his sink. Familiar enough. David frowned, shook his head of curly black hair. "Ass," he said to the image staring back at him. "What the hell do you think you're doing, anyway? Ass." There was a knock on the door. Of course, Alex had come up to say hello to him. David started to laugh at himself. He had to laugh. "Shoot, you better snap too, son. Soon, son." He pulled open the bedroom door. It wasn't Alex after all. It was one of the hotel porters, a man named Johnny Williams, who lived in Poughkeepsie and who used to make take David and Nick to the YMCA basketball tourney on Market Street in Poughkeepsie every spring. David succeeded in blowing his opening lines away. Anyway, "Oh, yes, hi, John," David managed. Johnny Williams grinned. "Oh, excuse me, Dr. Strauss," which finally forced Alex to step into the doorframe. Her hands were nervously smoothing her jeans. She looked terrified. She pushed her hair away from her eyes. "Oh, damn it, I'm sorry. I was just afraid to come up alone, David," John volunteered. Well, I sort of volunteered John. Then the two of them were hugging. Johnny Williams was patting both of them on their backs as if to say that whatever they were doing was just fine. Alex was crying a little. She was mumbling condolences about Upper North Street, Elena, Nick, and everything. Finally, Alex stepped back and looked at David. "How are you doing?" Alex started to laugh. "I couldn't just write this time. I had to come." Chapter 28. That evening, Cherrywood's lake lounge smelled of pine resin and wildflowers, also faintly of wood ducks and brown trout. Outside on the lake, a flotilla of sailboats looked like Indian teepees on the horizon. Heads at the bar began to turn and look at Alex and David. The two of them talked about how Cherrywoods hadn't changed since they'd been teenagers coming up there every summer. Nothing too seriously revealing, just nice man meets nice girl talk. Just two friends trying to remain sane during a particularly bad time, a time worse than either of them wanted to let on. At 8:30, they hiked to the hotel's summer kitchen. That hectic 80 by 60-foot food emporium was a chef's wildest dream. To be more exact, the kitchen was everything a French Jew named Jules Stein could dream about, read in gourmet magazine, hear on the French chef, or outright steal on his annual 6-week pilgrimage back to Provence. Alex's eye traveled along wooden pegboards with cutting and spooning utensils, down past a fleet of stainless steel pots and skillets. Even with the hotel less than a third full, at least 40 loaves of brick oven white, caraway rye, pumpernickel, and sourdough bread sat like adobe houses on butcher block tables. New York cut steaks as thick as the Ulster County phone directory were stacked on another table. Roast beefs, ribs, roasting chickens were in abundance. So were delicious apples, pears, Cadota figs, tins of cocoa, David's old childhood nemesis, postum. There were cold pantries and vegetable bins, a walk-in freezer with separate butter and milk refrigerators, 9 flat black gas stoves, each with 16 burners. Since we've been displaced persons here, I've been cooking, David said as he conducted the cook's tour. If you're hungry, Alex, and brave, we could maybe cook something tonight. Alex broke into her most comfortable and natural smile of the day, her first real smile in weeks, she thought to herself. I couldn't tell you how much I like that idea. I might even cook for you, she said, if you're brave. David fetched a bottle of Lafitte Rothschild from the bar, and drinking immoderately as they went, they fashioned boned chicken breasts, tomatoes, pommes frites, I don't know how to say that, cherries, sausage, and bicoupe de garlic into a spectacular feast for two, after which they ate like pampered royalty in a huge sunset lounge. I want to learn how to cook like my dad does. With Tommy Thompson's four-playing Feelings and Tie a Yellow Ribbon for 40 to 50 ballroom dancing couples, with two FBI agents taking shifts sitting at one of the banquet tables, guarding David and eyeing Alex. David ordered a third bottle of wine, and they began to listen more closely to Tommy Thompson. Sax, drums, trumpet, piano, slightly staccato and not always together. Schmaltzy as hell. Wonderful as leafing through old Life magazines, Alex said. A young bearded man was dancing with his wife and 5-year-old daughter. Very touching and nice. Two 80-year-olds performed a tango hustle. Finally, David and Alex got up to dance. They danced to Fascinating Rhythm, then a foxtrot to There's a Small Hotel. Yeah, I can't dance to save my life. Not even gonna try. The band shifted into a slow number, Moonlight and Roses, and David and Alex could suddenly hear the floorboards of the lounge creaking like a crowded gymnasium. They danced one more slow song, the band's finale, Stars Fell on Alabama, which segued into Too Marvelous for Words and Good Night, Irene. They left the moonlit lounge through French doors leading into the even more moonlit gardens. Owls were hooting way off in the woods. Nearby cicadas sounded like a softly blown whistle. It was disturbing to David, though. He began to get obsessively paranoid as soon as they walked out into the darkness and night noises. Alex loosely hung onto his arm. David was terribly aware of her perfume, a light, flowery, subtle smell. Her soft hip was just barely touching his. 3 bottles of vino. Whew. Alex shot her eyebrows up. We should go in now, David, she finally said. I'm a little frightened being out here in the dark. You're a wonderful host, Alex said as they walked the long corridor to her room. And you're the best French cook in New Paltz, Dr. Strauss. Maybe next to my mentor, Jules, David said. You're the best schmaltzy waltzer around, he added. David then bent slightly and kissed Alex. He tasted a sweet, faint fruit he couldn't identify. He felt slightly dizzy. Didn't he just, have his fiancée die? Okay. The two of them stood in the hallway for another uncomfortable moment. Alex switched her weight from one foot to the other. David brushed his hair back with his fingers. I'll see you in the morning, Alex finally said. As he climbed the remaining 2 flights to his room, David caught himself whistling Feelings, a song he didn't like, but which seemed pretty fantastic that night. Inside his room, he sat on his big Victorian couch and felt a little horny. Yeah, he felt a lot horny. Yeah. He doodled on a page in his scrapbook. He listened to the crickets and owls. David then sketched out a fake New York Times front page and wrote a whimsical headline which he loved. Nothing bad happened today. Chapter 29. Bucks County, Pennsylvania. Something nice, then something not so nice. First, Two bicycles, their riders in perfect control, letting their machines glide through the woods like electric blue hawks. Coming up behind the bikes, the Fuhrer, cruising along a Rockwellian country road in a black late-model Mercedes sedan, a classic German automobile. The engineer observed. A wealthy and powerful German's pleasure car. Stepping out of the automobile, the Fuhrer was formally introduced to SS Captain Otto Kaltenmoss, supervisor of Auschwitz Crematorium Number 1, smuggled out of Germany in 1945 by HIAG, the organization of SS veterans set up by Martin Bormann. Kaltenmoss had been living in Pennsylvania for almost 30 years now. He was known as Sven Hetling, a good neighbor, a very good citizen. Had anyone accused Mr. Hetling of the mass murder of innocent men, women, and children, his neighbors would have defended him staunchly. When the engineer had revealed to Hetling that he was once again needed by the Reich, however, Captain Otto Kaltenmoss had returned to his old form with the snap of a crisp salute. It almost seemed as if the slightly gawky-looking farmer missed the excitement of the old days. Captain Kaltenmoss would do whatever was necessary to further the plan of the Chow II and the Fourth Reich. Chapter 30. Later that afternoon, the Fuhrer and the engineer sat on the warm hood of the shiny, hand-tooled Mercedes. 400 yards down a rutted dirt turnoff, Otto Kaltenmoss's ramshackle house seemed to be leaning up against a great old elm tree. On the opposite side of the farmhouse stood the much more impressive living quarters of his prize-winning Wyandotte, Rock Island, and White Leghorn chickens. A very necessary and potential devastating experiment was in progress on the earnest-looking farm. The engineer was already well along in his final countdown. His work of the past 2.5 years was on the line right now. The engineer's voice was measured, a metronome, an emotionless sound that was frightening in itself. 146, 147, 148. This little chicken house, the Fuhrer said. It is something like the barracks that once stood at Auschwitz. Also, you know that the Reichsfuhrer Himmler owned a chicken farm? The gaunt, scholarly-looking engineer nodded. His flat gray eyes never once left the chicken house. Look, there was a slightly octave change in the man's voice. Do you see it? Bright white sparks were jumping off the shack's roof. There was evidence of extreme heat or electricity at work. Inside the building, Sven Hetling's chickens had begun to screech and buck. Their blood was boiling, the engineer computed. Compounded microwaves were penetrating their bodies at an extraordinarily high rate. Then came a low registered buzzing noise, as if a nearby high-tension tower had shorted out or fallen. 189. The engineer slowly checked his 5-minute stopwatch. A little over 3 minutes. This is exceptionally good. It's better than we should have hoped for. Eerie white sparks were sputtering over the chicken house like silver rain. The low sky was filled with black clouds, and it was the weirdest natural sight imaginable. Well, let's go see, the engineer finally said, something like sadness coming into his voice. The Fuhrer and the engineer began to walk in measured, deliberate strides toward the glowing farm. The weaving ruts were ankle-deep from the tires of heavy delivery trucks. The crabgrass on the strip between the tracks had grown nearly a foot high, and it was full of rotting green apples. The engineer had to use a thick wet rag to open the steaming door of the blistered, peeling shack. Terrible heat and a sharp, unpleasant odor escaped in a blast, as if from a furnace. Tiny sparks were flying around the dark room like lightning bugs. Little droplets of silver rain seemed to cling to the rafters and overhead beams. As they stepped farther into the smoking building, the Fuhrer and the engineer saw cage after mesh-wire cage filled with burned, nearly blackened chickens. In one corner lay the body of Captain Otto Klotmas. The German man had burned to death as well. He was unrecognizable. The captain served the child too well. The Fuhrer quietly shook his head. No need for unnecessary witnesses, I suppose. No need for an old man who might accidentally share a secret with one of his American friends or neighbors. On a closer look now, the upper layer of cages drew the engineer's attention. Inside these cages, slightly gray hens and capons with deep, red-rimmed eyes were stumbling from wall to wall. The birds walked something like barroom drunks. As they touched the sides of their cages, the chickens sizzled and appeared to dance a bizarre step or two. This is not acceptable, the engineer spoke in a disturbed whisper. Some of the birds are still alive. The Fuhrer, meanwhile, had already turned away and was walking down the rutted dirt road, not the least bit displeased with the work of his brilliant engineer, quite awestruck and shaken, in fact. The ovens were ready. That's fucked up. Hope you liked it, baby.